Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my series of mini classes on remedies. This is my second one. I hope you enjoyed the first one on calcinosin. Today, I'll be talking about the remedy sepia and going through the remedy with a mind map. So let's jump straight in. So let's look at the themes of sepia. In this mini class, I'll use common situations for women to put the symptoms into context. But of course, there can be many other causations and many other circumstances that sepia can be good for. It's often described as a woman's remedy, but occasionally we do prescribe it for men too. If you've watched my sepia story, then that brings the symptoms to life in an easy and understandable way. So let's start off with one of the main areas of causation for sepia, and that's ailments from hormonal changes. Sepia is really useful at any time where a woman's hormonal balance shifts in any way. So let's start with puberty. There can be many problems at puberty that continue through a woman's life, such as delayed periods or painful periods, PMT, bearing down pains, and bearing down is one of the main kind of keynotes of sepia. So we also have hormonal treatment where symptoms can come on after hormonal treatment, such as after the pill or IVF, etc., where this has really shifted a woman's hormonal sphere out of balance, then sepia can often, if it fits, can often help to bring that into balance. And we also have menopause. So towards the end of a woman's fertile period, we'll see symptoms such as hot flashes and pain and emotional changes as well. Again, if the symptoms fit the sepia picture. But really where sepia comes into its own is during pregnancy, and that's where often the journey for a sepia patient starts. She may have the cliche craving for pickles, and if you've heard my sepia story, then that's covered in that. Morning sickness is a common symptom that sepia can help with. And then there's other symptoms such as constipation, thrush, and so on. Once a woman then begins family life, let's go to family. Once a woman begins family life, then you'll often see the classic picture of a sepia patient. She tries to juggle everything. So she tries to juggle looking after her family, her, and also maybe a career too. The needs of her family and her husband override her own, and she tries to keep them happy and care for them, and she really just forgets about herself. And what that leads to is overwhelm, and she starts to become angry and irritable with everybody, her children. She can find herself shrieking at her children and feels guilty for having done so. She'll get to the stage where she can also, almost have an aversion to her family, and particularly an aversion to her husband. That progresses to a point where she could even desire to escape from her family. So you can picture that. I think a lot of women who've been through family life can identify with that overwhelm and the irritability and the out of character shrieking and shouting at her children. And if you give a sepia to a woman at this time, it can be such a joy to watch as she reclaims her identity. With the aversion to a husband, she may find that she has a very low libido and is averse to sex. She might find sex painful, and that in turn can actually lead to an aversion to sex. So while we talk about that theme, sepia is also very useful for somebody if the symptoms fit, who has had ailments from abuse, they can develop fear of sex, and they can also develop an aversion to the opposite sex. So going back to the woman who has become irritable and is feeling overwhelmed, what that often then leads to is a kind of shutting down where she starts to become indifferent. She has sort of no joy or sadness or weeping. She feels almost kind of monotone. She's indifferent to everything. The spark, the joy in her life has gone. She can be indifferent to her business, and she can get to the stage where she is just averse to company in general. So what we then have is a progression into a kind of sluggish demeanor. So her whole system, becomes sluggish. There's a stasis. That sluggishness can lead to exhaustion. Everything becomes heavy and slow, and that can in turn lead to constipation. She can have circulatory issues because, again, everything is slow. So you might find that she has very chilly extremities, a bit like in Raynaud's syndrome. And then you have the keynote symptom of that heaviness, that dragging down, that sort of prolapse that you see with sepia patients. And you have that keynote symptom of that kind of heaviness, as if everything is going to drop out and they have to cross their legs in case. So, we have that bearing down feeling. The polarity to the sluggishness is that they can be energized by exercise and being busy. So you see another keynote symptom of exercise ameliorates, and the sepia woman can feel very much better in herself, emotionally, physically, and mentally, after violent exertion or keeping busy. And like carcinosin, they have a love of dancing, and they feel so much better for dance classes. So we have, the heaviness, the dragging, the prolapse, we've got the bearing downwards. So we look at the generals and the keynotes now. And in sepia, again, you have that kind of cliche craving for pickles and vinegar. They love chocolate. They have lots of upward pains and flushes. So the hot flushes during menopause can often start lower down and go upwards. And pains can also do that. But then you also have the polarity of the bearing downwards. So you often see pains that can start from above and travel downwards. They have an interesting keynote, which is not often talked about, and that's milky discharges. So you'll often see coryza that's milky. They can have expectoration when they cough that's milky. Their leukorrhea can be milky in look and texture. And even their urine can have a milky look to it. So when we're looking at the whole of sepia now, we can recap, and see that hormonal changes are central to the sepia picture. Then you have that journey that starts with periods and pregnancy and then goes on to family, and the irritability, the overwhelm, the aversion to their family, that then leads to the indifference where they feel flat and they have no interest in life. And that leads to the sluggishness and the slowness and the heaviness, which is ameliorated by being busy or exercise. And, going back to the hormonal changes, they can have issues with sex where they find it painful, they have a low libido. It can be useful for abuse, ailments from abuse. And then finally, the recap of the keynotes, which we've generally covered, the downward and the upward pains and the upward flushes. They're often very chilly, and again, that fits in with the sluggishness where their circulation is not working properly, and so they're chilly and they feel better for warmth. And then finally you have the milky discharges. So I hope that mini class has been useful in highlighting the symptoms of sepia. And let me know in the comments if it has been helpful and if there's any themes that you were unaware of. And watch out for my next mini class. Thank you.